Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dairy Raid for part 4 of Spring Forward, where we're looking back at what we've learned about the Badgers so far in order to look forward to what we are building towards for the beginning of the season. And this time we are talking about the wide receivers. Yet another position group that heading into spring was just a big question mark. There were bodies, but there was no established number one. The room didn't feel like there was an identity, and there's no clear hierarchy in the room, at least from what we could see of going into spring. But when you add new players, new coaching, new concept, and a different way of attacking the passing game, I think this room made a lot of positive steps forward. And even though we may not have a true number one, this has the potential to be one of the strongest receiver rooms we have had ever. Doesn't say much when our offense has usually been based on solely the running game, but I really like how they have rebuilt to the receiver room. So let's get into it and talk about what they did this spring. All right, so wide receivers. Not a lot left over from last season. A season that we would probably like to forget about in terms of offensive football. But with 5 transfers, 3 early enrollee freshmen, and more importantly, a new wide receiver coach, the room was rebuilt before we even got back on the practice field. And this room needed to be rebuilt with a common trope that I've been mentioning the entire time I've been doing the Dairy Raid. Receiver room built for modern football. So what does that mean? Well, we need receivers that are more explosive, more athletic, more consistent, and then that builds a more competitive room. And only then are we going to have an effective reset with our eyes moving forward. And it really starts with the man up top, with new wide receiver coach Ari Confessor. And have to admit, like most of you, I didn't know who he was when he was hired. He did some work in college ball at Wake Forest. Most recently was the assistant wide receiver coach with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But we didn't know much about him as a coach. I would figure offensively, at least in terms of how he sees the game, he should be in line with the direction that the offense is moving. Having worked with the Jacksonville Jaguars, whose head coach comes from the Shanahan tree and therefore at least is adjacent to the Grimes scheme, understands how wide receivers need to play in this type of NFL style offense. And what really struck me early on, and from both his media availabilities and watching his Wired Up segment, is he embraces the physicality and he embraces the aggressiveness, finishing every rep, making every rep competitive. And that's necessary in an offense like this because regardless of how advanced our receiver room gets and how good our quarterback play is, we are going to try to build a run first, heavy run pro style offense. So for receivers to thrive in an offense like that, one, they need to be able to block. You're not going to get on the field if you don't know how to block. And that should be a given. But then also too, when you are an offense who is relying heavily on the run, you're going to have defenses that are going to stack the box and try to be aggressive downhill to the run. It makes sense, right? But what are you going to do in the passing game? Well, we saw this for decades with the Badgers is we're going to be physical with your receivers on the outside and dare them to win one-on-one matchups. So when you already have to be physical in terms of blocking, but now you need to be extra physical when it comes to how the defense is going to attack you, it really changes the perspective that I think a lot of young receivers have, where it's just all about making fancy moves on the line of scrimmage and dancing around and getting open like they practice so often in 7-on-7 and stuff like that. What it's now going to take is consistency, using physicality to create space, and then having that top end speed to get out and get open quickly. Also doesn't hurt to have more size so your catch radius gets larger and have the ability to go up for balls that Wisconsin receivers in the past just really haven't been able to. A big Wisconsin receiver in the past was 6'1". We have multiple receivers on this roster now who are 6'3" and above with speed. It's just changing the dynamic of what it means to be a Wisconsin receiver. But kind of getting back to Coach Confessor, it really seems like he is just very detail oriented, and you could see it a lot in his Wired presentation where little things, but building that into the structure of what they are doing. And it's going to put more emphasis on discipline and consistency than it is on playmaking ability and flash. That is going to be an adjustment that young receivers are going to have to make. But what he can bring to that is letting them know that, yeah, that's what you need to go to the league, because he's seen it. Because all those receivers at that level have the discipline and the technical consistency and the physicality that we are going to now be requiring from our receivers. So I really like the step forward we made in the coaching staff, and it's going to help breed the competition amongst the players. And with no guaranteed roles, we saw such a heavy rotation with receivers working with all three teams, first, second, and third team, that I really think the floor of the receiver room has grown, and now it's going to be up to the individual players to raise their ceilings and hopefully raise the ceiling of the offense as a whole. All right, so what can we say about what we've learned about the passing game through this spring and how it relates to the wide receivers? And we talked about a little bit when we talked about the quarterbacks, that at least from what we have seen, there is going to be more of a focus on pure progression concepts in this year's passing game. And where that takes away some of the complexity of having to adjust what you do based on what the defense does in front of you, or making your decisions based on coverage, it is going to bring a greater sense of timing and the necessity for timing in the passing offense. And some of you may see this as a very air raid type way of thinking, and you are getting scared when you think of it. But more and more in modern football, and especially in the NFL is starting to realize what they're doing at the college game is, and I do this as well, and I have one of my failings. Sometimes I make the game too hard, and sometimes the game is too complex, and it really doesn't need to be more complex than, is receiver one open? Yes, throw him the football. I don't care why he's open. I don't care how he got open. I care that he's open, on time, on schedule, so I can get rid of the ball on rhythm. And we saw so much last season where the passing game boiled down to screens, play action, and chuck and duck. And there seemed to be no rhythm to the passing game. And so therefore, it was really easy for our quarterbacks to get off schedule, especially if we had problems getting off the line of scrimmage at the wide receiver position. So this season, I'm looking to see more of the route structure built into the timing of the quarterback's movement, his drops. So therefore, the receivers can also have an internal clock that is going to help them time their routes, get open when they need to be, and know where the spaces are supposed to be in the route structure. And it will help with decision making, and it will help make the progressions go that much more smoothly while still maintaining horizontal and vertical stress. And the good aspects, quote unquote, of the air raid with modern pro style passing concepts, which a lot of them were adapted from air raid style college offenses. But I digress. So there's a different structure when it comes to the passing game. I like watching 4 quarterbacks take a drop back and 4 balls come out at different times with 4 receivers getting open on schedule. That's a progression. It's building muscle memory. And it's something that is going to help us as the season goes on when plays get off schedule. At least you're going to have a progression built in, so you're looking for spaces and you're not looking to try to read defenders while you're on the run, or receivers having to read defenders while their quarterback is on the run. It's going to simplify those kind of things, and it's going to make it easier for this passing game to be more reliable, which is something that we have not had in a long time with the passing game. I would argue we rarely have ever had that consistency in the passing game. Good for Wisconsin is below average for a lot of other places. Anyways, obviously the transition to a more progression-based passing game does not come without its issues. Timing, obviously, is going to take a while to get used to. Also, when you have the fact that you have 2 new quarterbacks and 8 new receivers, everyone getting used to each other while we're trying to learn how to do everything. So, of course, early on, it is going to cause some problems. But what I like about the emphasis on pure progression is that there is a sense of, there's a built-in, I don't know what to call it, redundancy, a built-in backup plan. That's a better place to put it. If the quarterback has to leave the pocket, that these routes will have secondary options, or how the route is going to progress through, so you can look through a different window. I think a perfect example is early on we saw a really nice pass from Colton Joseph hitting Tyrell Henry on, I think it was the right side of the end zone as he was being flushed out. And when you look at where the route came from, you can see that it's a Y cross. Standard air raid style concept where he's going to look to a quick option to his right, and then a route is going to be coming from the left to the right at 12 to 15 yards deep, maybe 10, depending on where they are in the field, and opening up as he clears the edge of the box at depth, obviously. And then a third route or a fourth route trailing behind, usually a dig or a post. And that's exactly what happened. He went through his progression quickly on the front side, and then he had time to move out of the pocket and let Tyrell Henry get from the first window of the cross into the second window, that second window that's created when you take a vertical route on that right side to clear out take the top off the defense, and that creates space for your cross to come from the other side. And it's a standard 3-step drop combination that every offense kind of runs, but it's a nice concept that shows that the move towards maybe more pure progression is going to make those plays still work even when it gets off schedule. So as spring progressed, we would see more and more consistency in the passing game. And I went back through my notes and some notes I took based on what other people were saying this spring. And because I was really looking this spring for a lot of, keywords that kind of carried throughout everybody. And what I really liked hearing was, one, a lot of different names. That was really nice to see. And then when you're watching the video clips, you're seeing big mixes when it comes to who's on the field together. And this is leading to me to believe that, one, they're working to bring the entire floor, the entire foundation of the passing game up. So they're working to get everybody to a minimum standards. But that also means that there's going to be a lot of players who I think have different skill sets and can fill different roles in the offense. So I want to go through some of the players who were most mentioned and most talked about this spring and how I think their role will progress going into fall camp. Again, I want to make it very clear that spring football is about installation and it is about development. It is not about depth charts. It is not about game planning. So take everything that I'm going to say here with some of these players with a grain of salt, but pay attention to how they were used, why they were used, and who they were getting the ball thrown to most. So, going to start with Tyrell Henry. And when he first came to Madison, I was hoping that his inside-outside versatility would be useful in the air raid style offense. And I still think that is entirely possible. And it's funny that that's kind of how he is starting to build his role. I think clearly he is your number one option in the slot. I think he is also fully capable of being on the field in a 2 tight end situation where he has to line up as a wide receiver, but can motion into the slot, can be placed in a slot in a tray formation, whatever. He has that inside-outside versatility. He's consistent. And he has the knack of finding his space all over the field. And for such a small receiver, that is key. He is a very prototypical air raid style slot receiver. I think he's going to be able to take care of a big chunk of the receiver run game aspects that we had hoped we'd have Trech Kahuna do over the last couple years. It never really materialized. But Tyrell Henry quietly became, I think, the most dependable piece in the offense, in the passing game at least, because he consistently showed up on time in his routes. He's appeared to develop a strong chemistry with Colton Joseph, and he is going to be the type of guy that quarterbacks can rely on to get to where they need to be and to be open. His issue obviously has been staying healthy, smaller body, that can happen. But if he can stay healthy, he could be a very key contributor to this passing game because of how much he can offer as an all-around solid slot receiver with inside-outside versatility. All right, next let's talk about the biggest transfer portal win of this offseason, and that was the retention of Eugene Hilton Jr. And he was a player that in 2025, I saw the upside. I saw the maturity for a true freshman. Helps having a dad with an NFL background. And solid player. I questioned his top speed. And at times he had issues getting open. But you could tell he put in the work leading into spring. And just by all the different uses and how many different places all over the field he was used this spring, I think they've really found a solid jack of all trades type of receiver that is going to add so much personnel versatility to this offense because they used him in the run game, jet sweeps. They were able to use him in the RPO game. I noticed a couple reps of him working essentially as an RPO read on a glance or a slant. And judging by the reactions of some of the people who are at these practices, he was being still used as a vertical threat and showing speed and quickness off the line of scrimmage and having a solid catch radius that quarterbacks can just throw up the ball and he can go get it. It is encouraging to see that he put in that kind of work. And for a young receiver, that's going to set up well for the future. Obviously, he needs to stay consistent and keep overcoming his issues he had with getting off the line of scrimmage. But if his speed has caught up to his polish, the sky's the limit for Eugene Hilton Jr. Moving on, the potential, if Eugene Hilton was the biggest win, the potential biggest difference maker coming out of the transfer portal was Southeastern Louisiana transfer Jaylon Domingeaux. And it took a little bit for his name to be called consistently with the first team offense. But as spring went on, we were hearing about big catches, winning contested catches, and using his frame and his speed to become a perimeter threat. You know, he's had the mentality and the confidence. We heard that from the coaching staff, but just the ability. It is as simple as that. Having a big body who has the speed to stretch the defense and the hands and the physicality to win contested balls is something we haven't had here. Again, he's 6'3". Just there, he is a different physical presence than any receiver we have had in recent memory. And it is something this offense has sorely lacked, a true vertical threat. You do not need to be a 4-3 burner to be a vertical threat. You need to be able to be quick off the line and win any ball thrown your way. And Jaylon is on his way to being there, where I'm pretty confident that he is going to be one of the starting receivers. We're going to talk later about why being a starter doesn't say much. But if you win your routes and you have chemistry with the quarterback, then the sky's the limit. And he's going to be able to get on the field a lot. All right, next up, Zion Kearney. And here's a player who just brings the straight up size and speed to be the deep threat. And it seemed like every time he caught a pass this spring, it was for a big play touchdown. That being said, he wasn't mentioned a terrible amount of time, a huge amount of times. But when he was, it was catching first big passes from either the first team or the second team quarterback. So I think there's potential that he may not be in the top 3 when it comes to receptions, but he's going to make up with it with a big yards per catch, and his percentage of catches to touchdown catches is going to be quite high. When you hear a lot about explosive plays downfield, that's great. The way that he's going to earn more playing time, obviously, is being consistent with the physical game, with blocking, etc. But again, he's 6'3". And another year of development. And I think if he's not one of the key guys this year, he could grow into a potential stud down the road next year as a senior. But this year as a junior, I think he's definitely going to be in the mix and going to be there to be that vertical outside threat, up the fade, post, converting those into deep digs, and the type of guy that can turn any catch into a touchdown, which is what we need. And we haven't had. We've had good receivers at Wisconsin, but I mean, how many receivers would you say we've had are vertical threats? All right, next up, let's talk about Chris Brooks. So, I actually had a question on my tight end video talking about Chris Brooks. And it was a good point brought up about if Chris Brooks is running with the starters and is going to be in position to be a starter, what does that say about our receiver room other than concern? I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. Well, let's talk about Chris Brooks real quick, and then we'll talk about the whole starter narrative. I think Chris Brooks is your poster child of Wisconsin receivers who have good springs. The issue that Chris Brooks has had is he would put together a couple good practices and then he'd get hurt and we wouldn't hear about him for the rest of spring, the rest of fall camp, the rest of the season, whatever. I think he is a consistent, solid receiver. He is a good blocker. He can handle all of these pseudo tight end run game responsibilities that you would like to have a receiver have the ability to do in an offense like this. It's like running 13 personnel without having 13 personnel on the field. And he has enough route running ability that he can get himself open. So when he's on the field, it doesn't tip the hat to what we are doing that much. He's a solid receiver. But should we be concerned that he's being talked about as a starter? No. And here's why. Just because you were on the field first does not mean you are at the top of the game plan, you are at the top of the targets list, anything like that. It just means you're on the field for the first play. And, I mean, we look back last year. Jackson Aker was a starter. Because when you start offense in I formation with the fullback in, he's a starter. But was he a major part of the offense? Not really. And I think with Chris Brooks Jr., he could end up being your starter and in for the first play or two or whatever. But when it comes to impact on the passing game, I don't think he's even going to be in the top 5, top 4 at least. I think he's going to be solid where they need him. He's going to be reliable where they need him. But when it comes to making big plays, when it comes to being a bigger part of the passing game, I don't think that's Chris Brooks' game right now, at least the way that they see him in the offense. And therefore, he may be a starter on paper, but he's not a starter in terms of production. And that's okay. And I mean, you just have to look at what the early down goals are going to be for the offense as we get into playing games. Does it fit more what Chris Brooks does, or does it fit more what Eugene Hilton Jr. does? Or Tyrell Henry? That's what you got to think. So I'm not worried about him being starter. I think starter is going to be an unimportant word when it comes to the receivers, because I think there's going to be 5 or 6 guys who are going to receive contributor level playing time. Is that going to be enough to keep all of them happy? That's another story. But in order to help the offense get better, I think there's more depth beyond and less of a worry on who's actually going to be the starter. All right, so with that, I think we could start wrapping this video up. This offense clearly wants to be more aggressive. They want to create stresses horizontally and vertically, and they can do so by simplifying the progression reads for the quarterback, which is going to put more emphasis on timing and fluidity in the receiver room. And even though we might not have a true number one go-to target, that might actually be a strength, because the room has depth, versatility, a competitive nature, and there's enough complementary skill sets that we don't need to have one dominant receiver. We can have multiple receivers capable of functioning as primary targets depending on the matchup and the passing concept. And It's all going to come down to the quarterback play, but the talent is there in the receiver room that if used properly, we could have an above average, at least for Wisconsin, passing game this year. Is 2,600 yards passing going to be good enough to do anything of significance in college football this year? Who knows? But as a key piece to this constantly evolving offense, I think the receivers are in a good spot. A lot of questions, but a lot of upside. And that's something positive that we can look forward to heading into fall camp and into week 1. All right. I think we're going to call it there. Next time, we're going to wrap up talking about the position groups for the offense when talking about the running backs. Another position that saw a near total reset, but another position that had its floor raised through building dependable and complementary playing styles together to create strength as a whole instead of having to focus on one workhorse. Look forward to talking about the running backs. But that will be next time. Thank you, as always, for watching or listening, however you take this, and we'll see you then.